The alarm never had a chance to go off. Arthur Sterling was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed in the gray half-light of a Tuesday morning, staring at the calendar pinned to the wall of his small bedroom. One date was circled in red crayon, not by his hand, but by small, enthusiastic fingers that could barely form a proper circle yet. October 14th, Leo's birthday. 6 years old. Arthur let the number settle over him like a warm blanket, then stood, rolled his shoulders, and headed for the kitchen. Their apartment was small, a two-bedroom unit on the third floor of an older building on Maple Street in the modest section of Harrowfield, a mid-sized New England city quietly divided between old money and new struggle. The rent was manageable on a freelance carpenter's income, barely, but Arthur kept it clean and warm, and he had filled it with things that mattered. Leo's drawings were taped to the refrigerator in a sprawling gallery that changed weekly. A small bookshelf in the living room held a mix of picture books and well-worn adventure novels, the pages soft from repeated readings. On the kitchen windowsill sat a ceramic mug with a broken handle, painted lopsided and blue, a Father's Day project from Leo's first year at kindergarten. Arthur drank his morning coffee from it every single day. He started the coffee, then padded quietly to Leo's door and pushed it open an inch, the way he did every morning, just to watch his son breathe for a moment. Leo was sprawled diagonally across the bed in the way that only children can sleep, arms thrown wide, one sock on, one sock somewhere in the sheets, a stuffed gray elephant named Gerald tucked under his chin. His dark hair fanned out against the pillow, and his small face was completely, totally at peace. Arthur stood there for a full minute, leaning against the doorframe, and something in his chest that had been wound tight for years seemed to loosen, just slightly. Then he turned back to the kitchen and began making breakfast. By 6:45, the apartment smelled of scrambled eggs and toast, and Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing his sneakers on the wrong feet and his backpack already strapped on, his dark eyes bright and searching. "Is today my birthday?" he asked. Arthur looked at him with exaggerated seriousness. "Let me check the calendar." "Down." "Yep, October 14th. That sounds familiar." Arthur set a plate of eggs on the table. "Sit down, birthday boy. Eat before you tip over." Leo climbed into his chair and examined his eggs with the intense focus of a scientist. "Am I 6 now? Do I feel different? Do you?" Leo considered this. A little taller, maybe. Arthur sat across from him and hid his smile behind his coffee mug. The broken-handled one. The blue, lopsided one. The morning routine was well-practiced choreography. Arthur cleared the dishes while Leo brushed his teeth, checked homework, found the missing sock, replaced the sneakers, and hunted for the library book due back Friday. Arthur came to the living room to find his son standing by the door, one hand on the strap of his backpack, the other holding Gerald the elephant. "Gerald doesn't go to school," Arthur reminded him. Leo looked down at Gerald, then back up at Arthur. He's scared to stay alone. Gerald is a 6-inch stuffed elephant. He'll survive. But the look on Leo's face was so earnest and so soft that Arthur simply sighed, ruffled his son's hair, and said, "Put him in the outside pocket, not the main one. And if your teacher asks, he's a therapeutic learning aid." Leo's face broke into a grin so wide it nearly split his head in half. He zipped Gerald into the front pocket, so only the elephant's gray head peeped out, and he was satisfied. The truck was parked at the far end of Maple Street, as always, because the lot beside their building cost $40 a month, and that money was better spent elsewhere. Arthur walked alongside Leo, the boy's small hand in his, and Leo pointed out things the way he always did. A pigeon sitting on a fire hydrant, a cracked piece of sidewalk that looked like a map, a yellow leaf that was exactly the right yellow. Arthur listened with complete attention, because he had learned early on that Leo's observations were never trivial. The boy saw the world with a kind of humble wonder that most adults had simply forgotten. The truck was a 1998 Ford F-150, and it had seen better decades. The paint was more rust than blue. The passenger door required a firm lift and pull to close properly, and when it started up, on most mornings, with some coaxing, it produced a short, theatrical cough of exhaust that Leo had named the dragon's morning sneeze. The seats were cracked along the seams, patched with strips of duct tape in a color that had never quite matched the original upholstery. The radio worked on AM only, which meant that their commute was soundtracked by either farm reports or early morning talk shows. and they had developed a game of inventing ridiculous interpretations of whatever subject the hosts were discussing. Arthur helped Leo up into the passenger seat, buckled him in, and went around to the driver's side. He turned the key. The engine turned over with a prolonged complaint, then caught. "Good morning, Dragon," Leo said solemnly to the dashboard. The sky above Harrowfield was a pale, washed-out blue, the maples along the avenue turning gold and amber. Leo watched the world pass with his nose nearly against the glass and narrated quietly, and Arthur drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the door, and the morning was, objectively, beautiful. "Dad," Leo said. "Buddy, I don't want a birthday present." Arthur glanced at him. "No, I want to eat dinner at the table tonight. With candles. And you tell me a story. A new one." Arthur was quiet for a moment, navigating a traffic light. His hands on the wheel were rough, the knuckles scarred from years of tools and splinters, the palms calloused in a way that spoke of honest, physical work. He wore a navy work jacket, slightly frayed at the collar, and his jaw carried the shadow of a beard he never quite committed to shaving. "I think I can manage that," he said finally. "And a cupcake," Leo added. "One cupcake, with a candle that smells like vanilla." "You drive a hard bargain for a 6-year-old. Leo nodded, satisfied. He peered out the window as they turned onto Thornberry Avenue, and the character of the street changed markedly. The houses grew larger, the hedges trimmer, the cars in the driveways newer and shinier. They were entering the part of Harrowfield that the school occupied. Clearwater Academy was not a public school. It was a private institution with a history stretching back to the 1890s, housed in a converted estate on 5 manicured acres, with a waiting list for enrollment and a tuition bill that made most parents pale. Arthur paid it without complaint and without advertising it. He had an account, modest in comparison to his actual net worth, but substantial enough, set aside specifically for Leo's education. He drove his rust bucket truck, wore his work clothes, and paid the tuition in full every semester without a word. Most of the other parents drove vehicles that could have purchased Arthur's entire apartment building. He didn't care, not in the way they assumed. He turned off the engine and looked at Leo. "Ready, birthday boy?" Leo was already wrestling with his buckle. "I'm going to tell Mrs. Ellis about my cupcake plan," he announced. Arthur came around and helped him down from the truck, took his backpack a moment while Leo straightened his jacket. A gesture unconsciously refined, an old habit picked up from watching his father, and then handed it back. "Have a good day, buddy," Arthur said, crouching to Leo's level. He straightened the boy's collar, brushed a crumb from his cheek. "Be kind. Pay attention. And if anything bothers you, I know," Leo said. "Tell you first. Always tell you first. Always." Leo threw his arms around Arthur's neck without warning, a brief, fierce hug that smelled of eggs and soap and child. And then he was off, trotting toward the entrance, backpack bouncing, Gerald's gray head peeping from the front pocket. Arthur stood and watched him go. Elena Marsh was at the entrance of the reception building when Leo came through the gate, and her face did what it always did when she saw him. It went genuinely, unguardedly warm. She was 28. With light brown hair she wore in a loose bun that never quite stayed tidy, and green eyes that observed children with the particular quality of attention that the truly gifted teachers possess. Open, patient, always a little amused. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, bending slightly. Six, Leo confirmed. "And I'm having a cupcake tonight. With a candle." That is exactly the correct birthday protocol. Elena walked with him toward the classroom, glancing briefly back toward the drop-off lane. Arthur was still there, standing beside his truck in his work jacket, watching his son walk in. He caught her look and gave a small, slightly self-conscious wave. She waved back, then turned away before the warmth in her face could say something she hadn't decided to say yet. She had known Arthur Sterling for 14 months, and in that time, she had formed a very clear picture of him. He was a man who built things with his hands and raised his son with his whole heart. He was funny in an understated way that often caught her off guard. He showed up without fail, through rain and cold, never late, never flustered. He remembered the names of every child in his son's class and asked after them specifically. He brought homemade oatmeal cookies to the volunteer days. Good ones, not the store-bought kind. And he stayed to the end without being asked. He was also, she was fairly certain, one of the loneliest people she had ever met. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet, habitual way of someone who had simply learned to manage alone, so thoroughly and for so long that he had started to mistake management for fulfillment. She thought about him more than she probably should. Across the street, the morning was still unfolding. Arthur was pulling out a flat-pack delivery from the truck bed when a glossy white Porsche 911 pulled into the space behind his truck with the quiet arrogance of a vehicle that knows it is the most expensive thing on the block. The door opened and Vanessa stepped out. Arthur noticed her the way you notice a change in weather, a shift in pressure, an instinctive alerting of some internal system. He didn't move. He set down the delivery package and straightened. She was, objectively, striking. Vanessa had always known how to wear herself. Dark hair sleek and styled. Makeup perfect even at 8 in the morning. A dove gray wrap coat that whispered of a price tag most people would find genuinely upsetting. She was 32 and looked 25, and she was absolutely aware of it. She wore designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair, a handbag that cost more than Arthur's truck, and an expression she had been perfecting since roughly the age of 16. A specific brand of airy contempt that said, "I am looking at you, and I already feel sorry for myself for having to." She saw him and her mouth curved. "Still driving that, Arthur?" she said, loudly enough to carry across the lane to the 2 or 3 parents in earshot. She gestured at the truck with theatrical disgust, the way you'd point at something dead on the road. "I keep thinking eventually I'll show up, and it'll have finally given up." Arthur said nothing. He picked up the delivery package. "Seriously," Vanessa continued, tilting her head. There was something practiced about her cruelty. She had the performer's instinct for an audience. The parents nearby had slowed. She knew it. "What are you telling Leo? That this is normal? That showing up to a school like this in a truck that belongs in a junkyard is..." "Vanessa." Arthur's voice was very even. Not cold. Not hostile. Simply final, like a door closing on a quiet room. She blinked. "Leo just went in," he said. "He had a good morning. I'd like him to keep having one." He picked up the package, tucked it under his arm, and looked at her across the lane. "Have a nice day." He turned and walked back to the truck without hurry, without a backward glance, and without the faintest tremor in his jaw that would indicate any of it had touched him. Because it hadn't, not in the way she imagined. But inside, in some old room he kept locked and rarely visited, something did shift. Not because of what she said about the truck or the clothes. Because Leo had almost been within earshot. Because Leo's birthday was today. And Arthur would sooner burn every last cent he had to his name than let his son's birthday morning carry the shadow of his mother's contempt. He got in the truck, sat for a moment, and breathed. Then he drove to his workshop, where there was a cabinet to finish and a life to live. He didn't see the Blacktown car at first. It was there when he arrived at the workshop, a long, dark-windowed Cadillac parked across the narrow lane from the building he rented, engine off, still as a stone. He saw it, registered it, and went inside to work. It was still there at noon. It was there again at 3 when he left to pick up Leo. The Blacktown car was waiting in the drop-off lane. Not parked illegally. It was positioned with such exacting propriety, such precise consideration of spacing and placement, that it was clearly operated by someone who understood protocol on a level most people never encounter. Arthur pulled the F-150 in 2 spaces behind it and sat for a moment, studying the vehicle in the rearview mirror. British plated. That alone was unusual enough. The driver's door opened, and a man got out who made the lane feel somehow more formal simply by standing in it. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair cut with military precision, wearing a charcoal suit of obvious quality, the kind that doesn't advertise its cost because it doesn't need to. His posture was immaculate. His white gloves were immaculate. His entire bearing communicated, without aggression or performance, that he had served at a level of distinction that most of the Porsche-driving parents around him would never approach. Arthur's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sebastian. Sebastian Holt had been the Sterling family's head butler for 38 years. He had been in the house when Arthur was born. He had, on more than one occasion, been the only adult in that vast, cold manor who had spoken to Arthur with genuine warmth. And Arthur hadn't seen him in 9 years. Sebastian turned and looked directly at the F-150. There was no search in his eyes. He had known exactly where Arthur was. Arthur got out of the truck. They stood 10 feet apart in the busy school lane, and around them parents collected children and car doors opened and closed. and none of it seemed to touch the specific gravity of the two men facing each other. "Mr. Arthur," Sebastian said. His voice was exactly as Arthur remembered it, measured, warm beneath its formality, carrying the particular resonance of a man who had spent decades speaking carefully in important rooms. "Sebastian." Arthur looked at him for a long moment. Sebastian's face had aged, the lines deeper, the silver more complete, but his eyes were the same. There was something in them now that Arthur didn't like. Something contained and heavy. "How did you find me?" "Your son is enrolled at Clearwater Academy. The enrollment records list a parent's name. Sterling is not a common name." A pause. "Your father wished me to take my time. He was afraid you wouldn't come if you felt pressured." The words settled like stones in still water. Arthur looked away, his jaw tight. Leo was coming through the gate, backpack bouncing, spotted his father, and changed direction at full sprint. Arthur caught him automatically, lifted him, held him for a moment with both arms, a full, unguarded embrace that Leo returned with his whole body. Dad, guess what? I drew a picture of Gerald in art class, and Mrs. Ellis put it on the board. The actual board at the front. Front of the board? The most important part. That's a big deal." "I know." Leo spotted Sebastian over his father's shoulder. He considered the older man with the frank, unself-conscious assessment of a 6-year-old. "Who's that?" Arthur set him down, his hand on his son's shoulder, and looked at Sebastian. Sebastian looked at Leo, and something in the old butler's face became very still and very gentle, and he bowed. Not the shallow nod of social courtesy, but a genuine, deep bow. "I am an old friend of your father's," Sebastian said. "My name is Sebastian. I am very pleased to meet you, Master Leo." Leo considered this. "You talk like someone in a movie." "I have been told that," Sebastian said gravely. "I take it as a compliment." Leo decided he approved. He turned to his father. "Can we go? I want to tell you about the picture." Arthur looked at Sebastian over his son's head, and in that look passed the whole weight of what was unspoken. A dying man in a hospital bed 50 miles north of here, who had built a dynasty and lost his son and had finally, at the end of everything, understood what he'd traded. "Come to the apartment tonight," Arthur said quietly. "After Leo's bedtime. 8:30. Sebastian inclined his head. "Of course." Arthur took Leo's hand, and they walked to the truck, and Leo talked about the picture the whole way, and Arthur listened with his whole heart, and in his chest something that had been frozen for a very long time was beginning, very carefully, to thaw. That night, he made dinner with candles. He made pasta with a slow-cooked tomato sauce that his mother, dead 12 years now, the one person in that family who had been genuinely warm, had taught him from memory. He found a vanilla-scented candle in the drawer and put it in a cupcake from the bakery on 5th, a good one with real buttercream and a sugar star on top. He told Leo a new story, the one about a boy who could talk to trees, and the trees knew the secrets of the world. But the trees were very old and very slow, and the boy had to learn patience before they would speak. Leo listened with both elbows on the table and his chin in his hands, and when the story ended he said, very seriously, "I think the trees were teaching him how to be kind." Arthur looked at his son. "I think you're right." Later, Leo asleep with Gerald tucked under his arm, Arthur sat at the kitchen table across from Sebastian, and the old butler told him everything. Elias Sterling had suffered a significant cardiac event 6 weeks ago. He was 78, and his health had been declining for 2 years. He was alive, stable now, in the private wing of Hereford General, not a coincidence. The Sterling family had funded the hospital's cardiac center in Arthur's mother's name. Elias had come here specifically, Sebastian believed, because Arthur was here. "He wants to see you," Sebastian said, his hands flat on the table. The gesture of transparency he had always used, nothing hidden. "He wants to see his grandson. He knows he does not deserve it. He asked me to tell you that." Arthur wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, the broken-handled one. He was quiet for a long time. "He was not a good father," he said finally. "Not angry, just accurate." "No," Sebastian agreed. "He was not. He ran my mother into the ground. He treated her like an asset that had depreciated. He tried to run me the same way." Arthur looked at the table. "I left because I needed to find out if I was a person or a product. I needed to know who I was without the money telling me." "I know," Sebastian said softly. "And I found out. I built things with my hands. I fell in love with the wrong woman, and I had the best possible thing come from it. and I raised that thing by myself, and I know exactly who I am now." He looked up. "So why does it feel complicated?" Sebastian considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Because you are fundamentally kind. And fundamentally kind people find it very difficult to watch someone suffer alone, even someone who hurt them, even someone who earned their suffering." Arthur was quiet again. "He's dying," he said. "Not immediately, but the trajectory is clear. He has perhaps 6 months to a year without significant intervention." Sebastian allowed himself the faintest expression of carefully contained hope. More, possibly much more, if he has reason to keep fighting. Arthur looked at the ceiling, then at the drawing Leo had done that week, taped to the refrigerator, a figure with enormous hands and a big smile, labeled in unsteady letters, "Dad." "I'll go," he said. "Not yet, but I'll go." The papers arrived on a Wednesday morning. They were served by a courier who looked deeply uncomfortable about the whole business, who handed the envelope to Arthur at his workshop door with the energy of someone dropping a live grenade and stepping back. Arthur took the envelope, thanked him, and set it on the workbench. He finished mortising a dovetail joint before he opened it. The papers were from the law firm of Whitmore and Associates, a name Arthur recognized as one of Herefield's most aggressive family law practices, with a reputation for grinding opponents into submission through sheer volume of documentation. The filing was preliminary, an application for primary custody of Leo Sterling, filed by Vanessa Wentworth Caldwell, citing the father's limited financial resources, unstable housing, and alleged inability to provide an environment commensurate with the child's potential. 3 pages of photographs were attached. Someone had photographed his truck, his building, his workshop. The images were selected with particular spitefulness, every angle chosen to emphasize rust, peeling paint, aged infrastructure, and general modesty. Arthur set the papers down and looked at his workbench, at the half-finished cabinet, at the tools laid out in neat order, the chisels from smallest to largest, the plane set carefully on its side, the way his foreman at his first job had taught him, because it's the iron that does the work, son, and you treat it right. He picked up his phone and called Warren Holt, a man who had nothing to do with the Sterling family and everything to do with being genuinely good at what he did. He explained the situation, briefly, clearly, without heat. "This is Whitmore," Warren said. "They're expensive, Arthur. Gregory Caldwell is paying for this, and from what I understand he's got resources, I know. How much do you need to start?" A pause. "You understand what you're walking into? They'll depose you. They'll go through your financials. If your income doesn't look." "Warren," Arthur said quietly, "trust me when I tell you that my financials are considerably more interesting than they appear. Please just prepare the response." He didn't call Sebastian about the papers. He didn't want Sebastian to activate the full machinery of the Sterling legal department, which could have crushed Whitmore and Associates and Gregory Caldwell in about 48 hours. That wasn't the point. This fight needed to be Arthur's, clean, legal, and on his own terms, in a way that protected Leo and served some higher principle of fairness. But he was angry, not the hot, performative anger that Vanessa had always expected, the yelling, the slamming of doors she'd mistaken for strength and then mocked as weakness when it faded. This was a colder, quieter thing. The anger of a man who has very carefully built a life and is watching someone attempt to dismantle it not out of love for his child, but out of vanity and financial desperation. He understood now, with Sebastian's quiet briefings over recent weeks, that Gregory Caldwell's business empire was a Potemkin village. Beautiful facades over empty rooms. His development company was hemorrhaging money. His investors were growing nervous. And apparently, in the calculus of Vanessa and Gregory's public relations strategy, swooping in to rescue a child from a deadbeat carpenter father was worth more in sympathetic press coverage than anything Gregory's PR team could manufacture. They were using Leo as a prop. That thought made Arthur's jaw tighten in the dark of the night. That somewhere in a glass and chrome office, Vanessa and Gregory had looked at his son, his 6-year-old, elephant-carrying, tree-store listening, 1-cupcake birthday-wanting boy, and had calculated his value in column inches. He drove Leo to school the next morning, and he listened to the full account of what Gerald the elephant had apparently done overnight, slipped off the windowsill and knocked over Leo's water cup, which Leo had decided was Gerald's plan to water the drawing on his desk, and he laughed at all the right parts, and held his son's hand until the gate, and watched him go in. He did not cry, but it was close. Elena found him in the parking lot that Friday. He was standing beside the truck after drop-off, staring at something in the middle distance with an expression that he probably thought looked neutral, but that she had come to recognize as his managing something difficult face. A particular set to his jaw and a slight distancing in his eyes that appeared whenever something was weighing on him, and he had decided, typically incorrectly, that he could carry it alone. "Mr. Sterling," she said. He came back from wherever he'd been. "Ms. Marsh." His mouth curved. "Elena." She had, some months ago, quietly graduated them past last names. He had seemed mildly surprised, and then quietly pleased, in the way of someone who doesn't expect small kindnesses and therefore values them unreasonably highly. "Leo showed me the birthday cupcake photo you texted the school account," she said. "Regulations say I have to document birthday treats. Regulations say you have to log it. They say nothing about photographing it with Gerald posed next to it like a second in command." Arthur's smile was real now. It always reached his eyes when it was real, and when it reached his eyes it changed the whole shape of his face into something younger and slightly unguarded. Gerald felt he deserved credit for the candle negotiation. Elena laughed. Then, because she was not the kind of person who circled indefinitely around things, she said, "I heard about the custody filing." The smile faded. "Not entirely, but enough." "Who told you?" he said. "Vanessa told Mrs. Patterson at the school gate, loudly, on Wednesday. Mrs. Patterson told the receptionist. The receptionist told me." She washed his face. "I'm sorry. I know that's not how you would have wanted to hear it." "No," he agreed. "How are you?" He looked at her for a moment. The question, genuinely asked with genuine attention, seemed to catch him off guard in a way the custody papers hadn't. "Managing," he said. "That's not the same as okay." "No," he said again. "It isn't." She leaned against the car beside her, arms folded, not crowding him but not going away either. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want you to hear it without immediately telling me it's not necessary." He watched her. "I have some savings," Elena said. "I've been putting money aside for 3 years. It's not enormous, but it's enough to cover a retainer for a good family law attorney, and I know Warren Holt is already." "Elena." His voice was very quiet. "I know how this sounds," she said. "I know we're not. I mean, professionally, obviously, and I'm not trying to make it strange. I just..." She stopped, started again, and her voice when it came back was stripped of its careful professional steadiness. "Leo is the best kid in my class, and he has the best father I have ever seen in 9 years of teaching, and the idea that someone could take him away from you over money, over the appearance of having money, is..." Her jaw was tight. "It's not right, and I have something I can do about it. So I'd like to do it." Arthur was quiet for a long time. The morning sounds carried around them. A crow somewhere in the maple trees, the distant laughter of children in the schoolyard, the soft hiss of a car passing on the street. The autumn light was low and gold, and it fell across Elena's face and caught the green of her eyes. And Arthur looked at her the way he very rarely let himself look at anything, directly, without guard, without the habitual distance he maintained between himself and the world. "Thank you," he said finally. "I won't take your money. But the fact that you offered it..." He stopped. His throat moved. "I don't have words for that right now." "You don't need words," she said. "I do have a good lawyer," he said, and something in his voice carried an odd undercurrent of quiet sureness that she couldn't quite place. "I'll be okay. Leo will be okay. I promise." She nodded. Then, after a brief hesitation, "If you ever want to talk, not as teacher to parent, just if you ever need someone." "I'll call," he said. He meant it. She could hear that he meant it. She walked back into the school. He stood for another moment by his truck, and the particular warmth in his expression didn't fade for a long time. The private wing of Harrifield General was on the 4th floor, reached by a keycard elevator that opened onto a corridor that felt distinctly unlike a hospital. Quieter, more considered, the floors warm wood instead of linoleum, the lighting softer. Sebastian met them at the elevator. Arthur had told Leo they were visiting a sick old friend. Leo, in his own preparation, had decided to bring 2 things: a drawing he made that morning of Gerald the elephant, and a small rock he'd found on the walk to school that was exactly shaped like a heart, basically. Sebastian looked at the rock when Leo produced it solemnly. Something happened in the old butler's face. He pressed his lips together briefly. "That is an excellent choice," he said. They walked to the last door on the right. Sebastian knocked, opened it, and stepped back. Elias Sterling was smaller than Arthur remembered him. This was the thing that ambushed him first, not the medical equipment, not the pallor, not the four-line or the monitors quietly marking the old man's heartbeat. The smallness. Arthur's memory of his father was of a figure that filled rooms, not with warmth, but with authority, a controlled and unyielding gravitational presence that had made Arthur feel, for years, like a planet in wrong orbit. He had built his self-possession in direct opposition to that gravity. The man in the hospital bed was 78 years old, and he was diminished by illness and age, and in his eyes, when he looked up and saw his son standing in the doorway, was something that the Elias Sterling of Arthur's childhood would never have permitted himself to show. Something raw and frightened and ashamed and desperate, all at once. "Arthur," he said. His voice was quieter than Arthur remembered, still precise, but underneath it now was something trembling. Arthur crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked at his father for a long moment. Elias looked back and did not look away and did not perform anything. "This is Leo," Arthur said. Leo had been observing from just inside the doorway with his characteristic focused attention. He came forward now, studied Elias with wide dark eyes, and then held out the heart-shaped rock. "It's for you," he said. "Because you're sick. When you hold something that's shaped like a heart, it makes you feel better. That's science." Elias Sterling, who had built a corporation from a starting stake of $40,000, who had sat across negotiating tables from heads of state, who had been described in 3 separate business publications as ruthless, and in 2 more as relentless, took the small stone from his grandson's hand, and his fingers closed around it, and something in his face simply gave way. "Thank you," he said very quietly. "I believe you're right." Leo, satisfied with the scientific validation, climbed onto the chair beside Arthur's and began telling Elias about Gerald the elephant and the drawing he'd brought, chatting with the effortless openness of a child who has never been taught that some people don't deserve his warmth. Elias listened. He held the stone. His free hand, Arthur noticed, had moved fractionally toward Leo, not quite touching, uncertain of his right, and stayed there, suspended between the old impulse of restraint and something new. Arthur leaned forward. He clasped his hands together on his knees. "I'm not here because everything is forgiven," he said, low enough that Leo, deep in his narration, wouldn't hear. "I'm here because I'm not willing to be the kind of man who lets another man die alone when he doesn't have to, even if things between us were hard." Elias looked at him. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. "I know what I was," Elias said. "What I did to your mother. What I did to you." A long pause. "I spent 30 years believing that what I was building was for you, that it was a gift. I didn't understand that what I was actually doing was replacing the relationship with the legacy," Arthur said. Elias closed his eyes briefly. "Yes, I know why you did it. It doesn't make it right, but I understand it." "I want to know him," Elias said, and his voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, like old wood settling. He was looking at Leo. "I want to know my grandson. I want to spend whatever time I have left learning how to be what I should have been." Leo had finished his Gerald narrative and turned to look at Elias with calm, clear eyes. "Dad says the best time to start doing something kind is right now," he said simply. "Because right now is always the right time." Elias looked at his grandson, then at his son. "Your boy," he said, "is very wise." "Yeah," Arthur said. His throat ached. "He is." He reached over and, for the first time in years, put his hand over his father's. Elias's hand turned under his, slow, careful, as if afraid the gesture might be taken back, and held on. The Clearwater Academy annual charity gala was held on the last Friday of October in the school's converted ballroom, a vaulted, chandeliered space that smelled of money and autumnal flowers and the very good intentions of people who write large checks and feel virtuous about it. The dress code was elegant casual, which at Clearwater meant the women would wear gowns and the men would wear custom-made suits, and anyone in something that could be reasonably purchased at a department store would register, consciously or not, as a different category of person. Arthur had been to galas like this before. He had been born into them. He put on a dark suit, a good one, cut narrow, that he bought at a second-hand shop 3 years ago for $45 and had pressed carefully that afternoon, fixed his collar, and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He looked like a man who owned a $45 suit. That was fine. He checked on Leo, who was at Mrs. Kowalski's apartment downstairs, his reliable babysitter, a retired school librarian who let Leo stay up past his bedtime, watching nature documentaries, and always sent him home with a new book. Leo had given Arthur a thorough inspection before he left and declared the suit very good. "Dad, you look like a good kind of serious." That would do. The gala was already in motion when he arrived. A warm, brightly lit room full of people with expensive drinks and expansive goodwill. The charity portion handled efficiently by silent auctions and pledge cards at each table. Arthur moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who has learned how to be invisible by choice, greeting the parents he knew, shaking hands, listening with genuine interest. He liked most of these people in small doses. They were not, by and large, malicious. They were simply accustomed to a world in which money was the primary language. He found Elena near the auction tables, examining a framed print donated by a local artist. She was wearing a deep blue dress that was not expensive but was well chosen, and her hair was down for once. She looked up when he approached, and the way her face changed, involuntary, unhidden, told him something that neither of them had said out loud yet. They stood together by the auction table and talked about things that were easy and things that were harder, and at some point they stopped facing the table and were simply facing each other, and neither of them seemed particularly aware of the gala happening around them. Then, across the room, Arthur saw Gregory Caldwell. Gregory was tall, broad-shouldered, with the practiced vitality of a man who spent money on his appearance and expected results. He stood with a cluster of investors, the cautious, evaluating posture of people still deciding, and he laughed too easily and gestured too largely and occupied slightly more space than he needed to, the way men do when they are working to appear more secure than they feel. Beside him, Vanessa was immaculate. She spotted Arthur across the room, and her eyes moved to Elena beside him, and something calculated moved across her expression. She leaned close to Gregory. He glanced over. His expression hardened into a social predator's attention. Arthur recognized the moment. He had been in enough rooms like this one. The trap was set. They were going to do it here, tonight, in front of people whose regard they thought mattered, using public humiliation to destabilize Arthur enough to make him seem unfit, or volatile, or simply small. He turned back to Elena. "I should tell you something," he said. She watched him. "Things are going to get a little dramatic in the next hour or so. I don't want you to be alarmed." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Arthur, everything is completely fine," he said, and there was that quiet certainty again, the thing she couldn't quite locate. "But if it gets strange, just stay close, okay?" She studied him for a moment. "You're going to tell me what's actually going on at some point, aren't you?" "Very soon," he said. "I promise." Gregory moved through the evening like a slow-moving storm, dropping comments at each cluster of parents. Just loud enough, just careless enough. "Did you know Leo Sterling's father is a carpenter? It's a shame, really." The custody filing was apparently common knowledge now. Arthur tracked the whispers across the room with the peripheral awareness of someone who'd grown up learning to read a room at 50 paces. He made a quiet call to Sebastian at 8:30. At 9 o'clock, Gregory positioned himself near the exit. Arthur collected his coat, said good night to Elena. She touched his arm briefly, a question in her eyes that he answered with a small, steady nod, and walked toward the door. Gregory stepped into his path. "Leaving early, Arthur?" The voice carried, for other parents were within comfortable earshot. Vanessa materialized beside Gregory with the timing of a practiced actor. "I was hoping we could talk. About Leo. I think we both want what's best for the boy, and I have to say..." He gestured, a sweeping motion that somehow encompassed Arthur's suit, his presence, his entire existence. "I'm not sure the current situation is optimal. Leo is thriving," Arthur said. "His teacher would be glad to tell you so." "Teachers see what they see," Gregory said smoothly. "But a child needs stability, resources, a certain kind of environment." His eyes moved pointedly over Arthur. "Frankly, I'm doing you a favor with this filing. You've been stubborn about this long enough. Let Vanessa and me provide for him properly. You can still see him, weekends, holidays. We're not unreasonable." Vanessa smiled, and the smile contained a world of victory pre-counted. Arthur looked at Gregory, then at Vanessa, then back. He said nothing. He simply smiled, not with warmth, exactly, but with a particular quality of patience. The smile of someone who is not in the conversation the other person thinks they're in. "Good night," Arthur said, and he walked out. The parking lot was lit by amber carriage lamps, the cobblestones still damp from an afternoon rain, the air cold and sharp with fallen leaves and distant smoke. Arthur's F-150 was in the furthest corner, as always, parked there with the quiet consideration of someone who doesn't want to take up too much space. Vanessa and Gregory came out behind him. Of course they did. They had rehearsed this, or something like it. Behind them came the sound of several other pairs of footsteps, parents drawn by the unfinished drama of the evening, the small social gravity of conflict pulling them gently along. "Arthur," Vanessa called out. He turned. She was standing in the center of the driveway, Gregory beside her, and behind them perhaps 8 or 10 parents who had drifted out with the natural instinct of a crowd for a scene. He recognized faces, the Hendersons, whose company worked with Sterling Logistics, though they didn't know that. The Prescotts, who sat on the board of the Sterling Foundation's regional chapter. 3 or 4 others. In Vanessa's expression was everything she'd been saving up. All the years of having left and needing it to be justified. All the choices that required his failure to make sense. "Go ahead," she said, and her voice carried clear and sharp. "Tell everyone how you're providing for Leo. Tell them about the apartment. The truck." Her eyes moved to the F-150 with theatrical pity. "Tell them why he shouldn't have better." Gregory added, with practiced regret, "We're only asking you to be honest, Arthur. The boy deserves more than." "He deserves exactly what he has," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, calm, the absolute, unmoved calm of a man who has already won and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. He has a father who shows up every single day. For 6 years, without fail. That's what he deserves. That's what he has. Vanessa's smile thinned. "That's lovely. But love doesn't pay for private school, does it?" "Love doesn't." "Vanessa," Arthur said, and something in his voice stopped her. "You made your choices. I've made mine." He glanced briefly at the parents watching. "But tonight, things are going to become a bit clearer." He put his hands in his coat pockets. He turned. He walked not toward the F-150. He walked past it, to the far end of the lot, to the street corner at the entrance. He stopped, and from around the corner came a car. It arrived without hurry, the way truly powerful things often do. Its lines were unmistakable, the upright, hand-built silhouette of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, custom coachworked in a deep navy so dark it was nearly black, the flying lady on the bonnet catching the lamplight like a sovereign announcement. Bulletproof glass in the windows. Bespoke panels. The kind of vehicle that is not purchased so much as commissioned, made for a specific person over months, with the collective effort of master craftsmen who understand that some things in this world must be perfect. It came to a silent stop at the curb. The parking lot was absolutely still. The driver's door opened, and Sebastian stepped out. He was in his full formal livery, tailored black coat, silver buttons, white gloves without a mark on them. He moved to the rear door with the unhurried precision of 38 years of service, opened it, and bowed. Not nodded, bowed. The deep, formal bow of a man of impeccable training in the service of someone of significant standing. "Good evening, Mr. Arthur," Sebastian said. His voice, as always, carried further than seemed strictly physical. "Young Master Leo wishes me to let you know that he has had 3 biscuits at Mrs. Kowalski's and is on a documentary about penguins and is perfectly well." A precise pause. "Master Elias also sends his regards." The silence in the parking lot had a specific quality. It was the silence of people revising large numbers of assumptions simultaneously. Arthur stepped toward the car. He paused, turned, and looked back at the assembled parents. His gaze moved briefly, without heat, over Gregory's face. Then Vanessa's. "The Sterling Corporation," he said, conversationally, the way you mentioned the weather. "Founded 1962, current valuation approximately $12.4 billion. Primary holdings in logistics, real estate, energy infrastructure, and the Clearwater Foundation, which, for those who weren't aware, is the charitable arm that funds 40% of this school's scholarship program." He held the pause of a man who has never needed to perform but understands the weight of information arriving at the right moment. "My name is Arthur Elias Sterling. I am the sole heir to that estate. I have been living as I chose to live, for reasons that were my own." His eyes moved to Vanessa one last time. and my son is not going anywhere. He got in the car. Sebastian closed the door. The Phantom pulled away in absolute silence. On the driveway, Vanessa's designer handbag hit the stones with a dull thud. She didn't appear to notice. Gregory Caldwell understood, approximately 12 seconds after the Phantom disappeared around the corner, that he was standing in a parking lot full of people who were already recalculating their relationship with him. The Hendersons moved first. John Henderson, a large, quiet man who had said nothing during the confrontation, stepped deliberately away from Gregory with the careful distance of someone separating themselves from a structural collapse. He took out his phone. 2 minutes later, standing by the parking lot wall, his voice was low and controlled, but the words "put everything on hold" were audible to 3 separate people. The Prescotts exchanged a look and went back inside without speaking to anyone. By morning, 3 of Gregory's 4 pending investment partnerships had sent communications through their respective legal representatives. The language was careful, but the substance was clear. The partnerships were being reviewed indefinitely. By the following week, 2 of Gregory's major suppliers had cited commercial concerns in terminating their agreements. A financial journalist, appearing with the uncanny timing of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, published a thorough, accurate, and devastating piece on Caldwell Development's debt structure. The article was read by people with very significant wallets, and they read it the way you read a fire inspection report on a building you're about to enter. Gregory's empire, which had been a Potemkin village, was now a village in which someone had walked through and checked every single building. None of this required Arthur to do anything. He made no calls, sent no legal threats, engineered no takedowns. He simply returned to his life. The investors and partners and journalists were responding to the natural consequence of having publicly disrespected someone with that name, in a room full of people who understood what that name meant. Gravity, Arthur had always believed, worked without assistance when the conditions were right. Vanessa called 3 times on Saturday. He let the calls go to voicemail. He read the transcripts his phone provided. The first was defensive, the second tearful, the third was something that wanted to be reconciling, but kept drifting back into calculation. "Arthur, I think we should talk. For Leo's sake. I was wrong too. I mean, I may have been hasty, and I've always known you were special. You know that. I always believed in." He deleted them. On Sunday afternoon, he took Leo to the park. They threw bread to the ducks. Leo narrated the ducks' preferences with scientific confidence, explaining that the duck with the slightly bolder coloring was definitely the leader, and the leader preferred the seeded bread to the white bread, and this was because the leader duck had sophisticated taste. "Like you and the oatmeal cookies?" Arthur said. "Exactly like that," Leo said, completely seriously. Warren Holt called Monday morning. "The custody filing's been withdrawn," Warren said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has watched a legal opponent make a large mistake. "Whitmore filed the withdrawal this morning. No stated reason." "I know why," Arthur said. "Arthur." A long pause. "Who are you exactly?" "Your client," Arthur said. "Send me your final invoice." "And Warren, invoice me the actual amount, not the friendly rate." A longer pause. "Sterling," Warren said, with dawning comprehension. "You're not. You're the Sterling." "Good afternoon, Warren." He hung up and allowed himself, privately, a small smile. 2 days later, he drove to the school in the F-150. Leo climbed in with his usual enthusiasm, buckled himself, gave the dashboard its customary acknowledgement, and then said, without preamble, "Dad, Thomas at school says we're rich." Arthur looked at the road. "What do you think?" Leo considered this with appropriate gravity. "I think we have enough," he said finally. "We have the pasta. And Gerald. And the window where the light comes in at breakfast. And you." He looked at his father. "That's more than enough. That's basically everything." Arthur kept his eyes on the road. His throat was not entirely manageable. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "That's everything." November came to Harrowfield in its usual fashion, gray skies and gold leaves, and the kind of clean, brittle cold that makes everything feel sharper and more vivid, as if the world is finally showing its real colors after months of green distraction. Arthur Sterling did not become a different person. This was, perhaps, the thing that surprised people most. He still drove the F-150 on school days, though Sebastian had delivered 2 other vehicles to a small garage Arthur now leased, a practical Range Rover for longer trips, and the Phantom, which lived clean and quiet in the dark and came out when occasion required. He still wore his work clothes to the workshop, still cut dovetails by hand because he preferred the feel of the chisel to the router's efficiency, still made Leo's breakfast every morning and packed the lunch himself. The broken-handled mug remained on the kitchen windowsill and remained in daily use. But he stopped hiding. He sat in on the school board's quarterly meeting and introduced himself properly. He took 3 calls from the Sterling Corporation's executive team, which had been managed by a trusted committee since his departure, and he began the gradual process of re-engagement, not a hostile takeover of his own life, but a careful, considered return. Like a man who has been away from his house for a long time and wants to walk through each room slowly before deciding what to keep. He visited his father twice a week. Elias was responding to treatment. The cardiac team, the best in the region, a detail not unconnected to the Sterling family's investment in the cardiac wing, had found a protocol that was working. He was not cured, and the word recovery was used with appropriate medical caution, but he was better. He sat up. He ate. He talked. He talked mainly to Leo. Leo, for his part, had adopted his grandfather with the serene confidence of a child who sees no obstacle to loving someone. He brought drawings. He brought rocks, 3 more heart-shaped ones, 2 shaped, like clouds, one that Leo insisted looked like Gerald from a specific angle. He told Elias stories about kindergarten with the same narrative commitment he'd always given to Arthur's bedtime stories, and Elias listened with a quality of attention that he had never, Arthur suspected, given to anything that wasn't a balance sheet. Sebastian told Arthur one evening in the corridor, "He is a better man in this room than he was in 50 years of boardrooms." "People change," Arthur said. Sebastian looked at him with quiet care. "You believe that?" "I have to," Arthur said. "I'm raising one. Elena." She came to find him on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the gala. He was in the school's woodworking annex. He'd offered to repair a set of classroom shelving, and had arrived at 7 in the morning to make sure it was done properly. She found him at noon, on his knees with a chisel, the sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled back, sawdust on his forearms, the shelving now level and solid in a way it hadn't been for years. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked up. "You repaired the shelves?" she said. "They were crooked. It was bothering me. You're a billionaire. You could have hired someone. I wanted to do it." He sat back on his heels and looked at her. "How long have you been standing there?" "A while." She crossed the room and sat cross-legged on the floor across from him. Not a thing that headmistresses' meetings and formal galas allowed, but completely natural in this room that smelled of wood and linseed oil. "I've been thinking," she said, about the fact that you've been here for over a year, driving that truck, packing Leo's lunch, fixing shelving, making oatmeal cookies for volunteer days." She looked at him steadily. "And I fell for all of it completely. And then it turns out you're the person whose name is on the wing of the hospital and the scholarship fund and—" She stopped. "And you're upset," Arthur said carefully. "No," she said. "I'm not upset." She met his eyes. "I just want to know, was it real? The conversations, the way you—" She stopped again. Her jaw was set with the composure people use when they're being very precise about not letting something show. Arthur set down the chisel. He was quiet for a moment. "When I was 22 years old," he said, "I walked away from a name that had made people treat me as a category rather than a person my entire life. I wanted to find out what it felt like to be looked at without the name, to have a conversation that wasn't shaped by the ledger." He looked at the wood shavings on the floor. "I found out. And I also found out that I was terrible at choosing who to trust with myself, which is how I ended up with Vanessa, and then without Vanessa, and alone with a 6-month-old who needed me to be more than I'd managed to become." He looked at her. "Leo made me better," he said simply. "Loving him and being loved by him. That rebuilt something in me that I thought was permanent damage." And then he held her gaze. "And then you. Watching you with him. Watching you see him." He shook his head slightly. "You looked at my kid, my specific kid, with his elephant and his rock collection and his unshakable sense of how things should be. And you saw him. Not his tuition. Not his last name. Just him." His voice was very low. "I've been waiting my whole life to be around someone who looks at the world that way." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "The truck," she said finally, and her voice was slightly unsteady. "Was the truck at least a real choice?" "The truck is real," Arthur said. "I genuinely like that truck." She laughed, the real kind, the kind that shakes the shoulders. And Arthur smiled in the way that reached his eyes, and they were sitting on the floor of a school woodworking annex in the middle of a Wednesday, and neither of them moved to change that. "Arthur," she said. "Elena, I have liked you," she said, with the particular precision of someone who has been very careful with words for a long time and has decided to be less careful now. Since approximately the 3rd week of September last year, when Leo told me that his dad always says the best time to be kind is right now. Arthur looked at her. Something in his face was completely unguarded. "Leo says that to everyone." "I know. I asked him where he heard it. He said you say it all the time. And I thought," she shook her head, "I thought, whoever this man is, he's teaching his son the only really important thing. And I kept waiting for you to be something other than what you seem to be." "And," he said quietly. "And you're not," she said. "You're just more of it. More of the same thing, all the way down. That's all you are." She paused. "That's everything." He reached across the space between them, slowly, giving her every opportunity to redirect, and took her hand. Her fingers wrapped around his carpenter's hands, his calloused, working hands, the hands of a man who built things and fixed things, and held his son, and never once thought about whether the people watching thought the hands were appropriate to the name. "I'm figuring things out," he said. "Going back into all of this, the company, my father, what I want to build from here. It's going to take time. It's going to be complicated. I know. And I have a 6-year-old who will absolutely involve Gerald in any major life decisions. Gerald and I have an understanding. I just want to be honest about what you're walking into." She squeezed his hand. "Arthur," she said, "I've been walking into it since September of last year. I just didn't have directions." She tilted her head. "Are you trying to talk me out of this?" He looked at her, and the smile was slow and real and entirely unguarded. And in the warm, sawdust-smelling quiet of the woodworking annex, it was the most powerful thing in the room. "No," he said, "I'm really not." December. The first snow of the season fell on a Saturday, which was the best possible arrangement. It came in the night, gentle and transforming, and by morning the courtyard outside the apartment was 3 inches of unbroken white. Leo saw it from his bedroom window and stood frozen for 10 whole seconds, a personal record of stillness, before turning to scream for his father. They went out before breakfast. Leo in his red coat and mismatched mittens, one with dinosaurs, one with stripes, and Arthur in his work jacket with his breath making clouds in the still morning air. They built what Leo called a snow elephant, and named it Gerald too, and ate breakfast outside on the front steps wrapped in Arthur's old work blanket, steaming bowls of oatmeal with brown sugar, watching the neighborhood gradually wake into the white world. "Dad," Leo said, "Buddy, is everything going to be different now? Because of the big car and the old grandpa and all of it?" Arthur looked at his son and thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Some things," he said. "Grandpa Elias is going to be part of our lives. We'll have more space, eventually. You'll have things that I've wanted to give you that we couldn't quite manage before." He set down his oatmeal. "But the important stuff, the pasta and Gerald and the window with the light and me, that stuff isn't going anywhere. That stuff is the foundation. You understand what a foundation is. It's the part under the house," Leo said promptly. "The part that holds everything up. You told me that when you were fixing Mrs. Kowalski's step, right? You and me. That's the foundation. Everything else is just the house we get to build on top of it." Leo thought about this. Gerald, too, listed slightly to one side in the courtyard below. "Yeah," Leo said finally. "That makes sense." He leaned against his father's arm in the unself-conscious way he always had, easy and total. "Dad, yeah. I told Thomas at school that we have enough. You know what he said?" "What?" "He said, 'But now you have more than enough.' And I said," Leo paused with the instinct for narrative timing he had been developing since he learned to talk. "I said, I always had more than enough. I just didn't know you'd call it that." Arthur sat with that for a moment. Then he put his arm around his son, and they sat on the front steps in the snow, watching Gerald too list peacefully in the white courtyard. And the morning was quiet and cold and absolutely, completely full. The following June, on a Thursday, Arthur drove the F-150 to Clearwater Academy for the last day of Leo's kindergarten year. The truck had been properly serviced and ran better than it had in years. Leo climbed in and buckled himself and gave the dashboard a ceremonial pat. "Good year, Dragon," Leo said. The carriage lamps of the school threw their amber light over the courtyard where parents gathered for the end-of-year assembly. Elena stood at the edge of the group, and when she saw the truck pull in, she smiled. The real kind, unguarded, and Arthur parked and got out and walked to her side. She took his hand. Elias Sterling, moved carefully by Sebastian and a cane, had come to watch his grandson receive his end-of-year certificate. He sat in the front row of chairs, his silver head upright, his hands folded over the handle of the cane. He still had the heart-shaped stone in his breast pocket. He had told Arthur, the last time they met, that he intended to keep it for the rest of his life. Leo walked across the small stage with the terrifying dignity of a small boy who has decided this is an important moment. He shook Dr. Whitfield's hand. He received his certificate. He turned to find his father in the crowd with the directional instinct that young children have for their parents. Immediate, unerring, absolute. Arthur waved. Leo's face became entirely, unmistakably, unconstrainedly joyful. In the front row, Elias Sterling watched his grandson, and his jaw was not entirely steady, and the stone in his breast pocket, exactly shaped like a heart, basically, was perhaps the most valuable thing he had ever owned, measured in any currency that actually mattered. Arthur held Elena's hand in the warm June air and felt the exact specific weight of this particular morning. The sawdust and the rust bucket truck and the broken-handled mug and the snow elephant and all of it, and understood that this was what he had been building, all along, through all the lean years and the loneliness and the stubborn quiet dignity of a man who knew who he was and refused to be anything less. Not the Sterling Empire, not the phantom, silent and immaculate at the curb, not the name on the hospital wing or the scholarship fund or the $12.4 billion valuation. This, the certificate, the wave, the face, the fact that his son, his 6-year-old, Gerald carrying, snow elephant building, rock collecting, cupcake negotiating, tree store listening boy had looked across a crowd of 100 people and found him in under 2 seconds. That was the legacy. That was the only one that mattered.